global, el fútbol. Esperamos que lo disfruten. In Dialogues That Move Emotions, we are happy to welcome two fantastic soccer ambassadors. They will tell us about their experiences with the most popular sport in the world. Welcome, Daniel and Jerome. Our host tonight will be Move Emotions co-founder Milton Rico. Move Emotion believes in the power of storytelling, and these dialogues have allowed us to build a sense of community in the midst of so much uncertainty. From our Move in Motion family, we hope that you find tonight's conversation helpful. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Milton to get us started.
Thank you, Diana, and greetings to our people from Milet Estéreo, the tri-state area. And thank you, Danny, and thank you, Jerome, for joining us today. Um, I told my mother that since it's her birthday, I would have some special guests, and I can't think of a better guest than you two. But also, since we were going to be speaking about soccer, I thought about all the soccer moms that have made everything so, I guess, beautiful and magical along the journey. And so I also wanted to give a big shout out to all the moms in Velez and at Amherst, including Mrs. Lovitz and Mrs. de Bontin. And I really think that they're a strong part of our success. And I wanted to give a brief introduction to these amazing ambassadors of soccer. Basically, Jerome is a native of France, graduated from Amherst College in 1981 with a degree of in economics, and has an expertise in real estate acquisition and development, asset management, and professional sport franchise management. Jerome served as the general manager for the New York Red Bulls Soccer Club and as the president and board member of AS Monaco and one of the premier teams in France. He's currently a senior advisor at Capricorn Investment Group, and something I just realized and I really respect and admire about him is how committed he's been to the climate crisis, to solving the climate crisis at a high level. Danny Lovitz graduated from Elon University in 2014 and with a focus in business administration and management. He has played in the MLS since graduating, mostly in Canadian teams, but we're happy to have him now in the US in Nashville. He's been called up to play for the US national team on multiple occasions, and he's won some exciting tournaments, scored some amazing goals, and there's still a lot for him to accomplish in his soccer career. I'm a big fan of him, and I had the privilege of playing with him growing up in Velez. And I always and against him when he was at Germantown and I was at Episcopal Academy. Throughout the years, I got to share time with him and can vouch for how amazing of a person he is. And I'm really grateful to him for having taken me under his wing when I showed up to the US speaking no English to play for Villas. And he basically was one of those first good friends. So thank you both for being here. And the basic sort of dialogue that we have is very unstructured. It's really about just sharing our stories, who we are, what we're about, and perhaps give a few insights given your guys's experience. I always think people who love what they do have a certain spark in their eyes, and I think it's certainly the case for you guys. So I think if we can learn from some of your experiences, that would be really awesome in this next 50 minutes or so. So I'll leave it. I'll open it up. Perhaps Mr. de Bonton, you can open us up with how you might want to express your stories, or
I
anything you might want
gladly
to share.
do so. I count on you to guide the conversation. It's never a good
Sure.
thing to talk about oneself too much, but maybe I can give a few pointers that relate to what soccer means to me and to what
Yeah.
extent the work that I did in soccer had some impact in the soccer that people play or watch
Yeah.
today.
Right.
As people can hear, and as you mentioned, I'm from France.
Yeah.
I played my whole youth in France. Was fortunate to find my way into college in the U.S. Played in college, so played at Amherst. After Amherst, I got married very quickly, moved to Chicago, and continued playing as an amateur in the Illinois League. And one thing led to another. Children were born, so I started coaching. developed a real interest in refereeing. I thought that refereeing was an area where one could really have an impact on the players, not only the kids but their parents too, because most people tended to ignore the rules. And jokingly, I could say to this day, most people don't know the rules, and that creates many conflicts. But got into the youth system through my kids, coach my two boys and my daughter. And like many parents at the time, experienced the pleasure of driving around the state. So in my case, it was Illinois, and driving around the region, because in those days, state cup mattered a lot, and playing for a good team that made it to the regional mattered a lot, and eventually into the national. I thought, in fact, that at the time there was an organization for soccer that was truly terrific, and I'm quite sorry that it has changed the way it has. But we can talk about this later.
Mhm.
My involvement in Illinois exposed me to the federation. Most people may not know this, but the U.S. Soccer Federation is headquartered in Chicago. In 1994, obviously, was the World Cup in the U.S. with the first game played in Chicago. I remember right, and maybe wrong, but I think it was Germany against Bolivia. And I helped with the organizing committee, and right after the World Cup,
Wow.
friend at the federation asked me to join the newly formed U.S. Soccer Federation Foundation, which was an organization funded with the profits of the '94 World Cup, with the idea of using that money to fund the growth of the sport, over the subsequent years. In fact, the foundation still exists today, and a lot of the money had been invested in the financial markets and the dividend reallocated to soccer. So it's been a real success. It was I think, first angel investor in MLS. I'm talking about the foundation here. It funded the Women's World Cup in '99, and then again in '03, and many other things that today we take for granted, but which, when we were talking about them 20 years ago, we were quite nervous over a potential success or not. The role I played, in the U.S., gave me a chance to, also be involved in Europe. As you know, one of my classmates at Amherst was Prince Albert of Monaco. He and I played on the Amherst college team, and very rapidly after Amherst, he asked me to help him in a number of businesses and venture in Monaco, and one of them was the Monaco Football Club. I joined the
Yeah.
board of the club in '99, and eventually acted as president for about a year, between 2008 2009. Soccer for me was a passion, and I shouldn't even say was, because I continue to play. And in fact, tomorrow is an important day for me, because after 4 months of confinement, a team is finally allowed to play. So I'll be back on the field tomorrow afternoon. Um, but my career was in finance, and as you rightly said, I've been involved with sustainability and fighting global warming, focusing on decarbonization, and particularly electrification of transportation for quite a while. But I sort of made my money in finance and spent it in soccer. Not totally accurate, but to a degree, it was true. I think the only time where I was a paid administrator was when I ran the New York Red Bulls, which I did for 2 years. I enjoyed most of it. I think I was particularly proud to be the GM of the first trophy of the year, the first trophy for the Red Bulls. We won the Supporter Shield for the first time in my first year there. But at the same time, and that's something we can talk about later, I grew quite frustrated uh, working for the league, realizing that when comparing my work in Monaco to what I was trying to do at the Red Bull, that it was those were two different worlds. While in Monaco I was in charge and I was competing for trophy. In New York, I felt more like I was an employee of the league, as were the other 16 or 17 GM of the time, just because of the way the sport is structured. And one of the things that I'll gladly talk about later, if that's of interest to you and of the audience, is to talk about maybe what went wrong in the past 20 years in regards to U.S. soccer, and what could we have done to be further ahead today than we are. And the one thing that people have heard me say, and I don't want to be too redundant, but I think it's important to know where I'm coming from, that I really feel that we suffer from poor leadership. And by poor, I mean we suffer from the fact that for too many years now, the federation, the league, soccer in general have been led by non-soccer people. Um, so with that as a opener for conversation, maybe we turn back to your friends and see what his experience has been with MLS, because I think he joined a few years after I left.
Parentheses before Danny's podcast as well. But on your shoulders, Jerome, and you talked about how you helped to structure the, I guess, the state club and or all these systems that later on Danny and I got to enjoy and growing up. So I guess I want to now pre-frame Danny's story as something that is linked to some of your efforts and your folks' efforts. But yeah, I'd love to hear about Danny's experience. Um, Go ahead, Danny. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, give us
So
context of what's going on around you. Why you have such
yeah,
a
so I'll just get everyone up to speed. I'm currently still at the resort in Orlando, Florida, where the MLS's back tournament is being put on. Unfortunately, my team, Nashville SC, a lot of guys got sick and contracted the COVID virus. So the league made the determination that we are no longer able to participate in the tournament, which is obviously very frustrating on a personal level, but more importantly for the club and for the team and for the city that was so excited to get everything started, to now have nothing to do as far as we know in the near future in terms of games and formal competition. We thought this may be our one shot this year with how everything's been. So long story short, we've been given, after a week of being quarantined in our rooms and not being allowed outside, for the next 30 minutes or so, we've been allotted time by the league and the officials down here putting this tournament on to enjoy a secluded little area on the side of one of the pool areas at this resort, where a lot of guys are playing outdoor games. I'm sure you can hear all the bangs in the back. They're throwing bags, playing cornhole, getting out some competitive frustration, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, I think before all this started, and to kind of segue into what was mentioned before, my experience, as Milton, from a very early age, was, sort of representative of the growing phase of U.S. soccer and certainly development. I don't think that the academies really played a huge role in our experience as youth players. And mainly towards the end of our time, we started getting approached by the formal likes of the Philadelphia Union or other academies that were starting to actually finally take shape. Whereas normally we were independently active as a youth club through a municipality, a city that was pretty common to how other soccer youth players were being brought up across the country. And for us, the best path and the ideal path would be to then be allowed to play at the collegiate level. And for you and for me, we were able to secure some financial backing from really good schools, first and foremost, and some really exciting collegiate programs that are doing big things at the D1 and D3 levels. And for me, I was just very excited to be first recruited by a Division I school and then to have an opportunity to play. I think everybody wants to go and play for the Dukes and the Chapel Hills and the Marylands, but sometimes it doesn't always work out in the form of playing time. And then when it comes time to try to make the leap to being a professional, you don't always have the best body of work to put out in front of pro coaches that are looking at you. So I was very lucky in being able to play all 4 years at Elon, and then out of nowhere got drafted, had my first pro experience with Toronto FC. And even though I was very new to MLS, as you mentioned, I noticed it with a foreign staff, and Ryan Nelson, who had played throughout the Premier League and was captain to New Zealand for quite some time, played in World Cups. They were still getting their bearings as far as MLS and the functionalities of the league. And it wasn't something that was an easy task. And that was for head coaches when they have the most pure interface with the club. They have to represent themselves in the front office. They also have to show face and manage the players. And for me, I always felt it was kind of odd to have a coaching staff that wasn't super confident or comfortable with how the league worked. I thought that wasn't productive. I didn't think that gave us the best chance at focusing on what the most important thing should be, and that's winning games and doing so the right way. Obviously, there are a lot of major different functionalities of MLS that are unique to this country, unique to this continent, really, in how the sport is set up. And unfortunately, when we get set up, we realize that that's always going to be a hurdle, at least for the foreseeable future. And we're going to have to deal with that. And with new staffs that come in from other leagues abroad, it's a really tough hurdle to try to get over. Hopefully it ends up being something that can become a more smooth segue, and we can begin to function a little bit more like the best clubs in the world if we really do want to reach that level, which the officials from the league and the commissioner are constantly putting forward that language that we do want to compete and be one, regarded as one of the best leagues in the world. I still think there's a long way to go. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that the talent in management and the talent in players could come over here and it would be a much smoother transition. And we could really just focus on what the most important thing again is, which is winning games. But a lot of times we get caught up, as I heard you mention, just feeling like employees of the league. And I couldn't agree with you more, especially from the player side of it. It's certainly a different dynamic, but a sentiment that we definitely share with you.
Mr. Bontin, do you think that there might be?
Well, I'd like to grab the opportunity to tell Dan, in light of what you said, I have a game at 2 p.m. tomorrow. If Dax and you want to get on a plane and come to Chicago, you're welcome to join us.
Hey, that's great. Along those lines, I do think that there's, I guess a lot of advice you might be able to offer for players like Dan or people who are having to, I guess, sort of reinvent themselves or readapt, given your experiences in the different chapters of life you've given to. So, I know that was part of, but also there might be some thoughts there.
Well, you touched on a number of important points, and it's always nice to hear that players have that perspective too. I've been real direct in making my point of view known right away about the lack of soccer leadership in America, and unfortunately, over the past 25 years, it has reflected itself in that leadership hiring too many foreigners, and continuously, particularly in regards to MLS, continuously bringing in foreign coaches, foreign assistant, foreign this, foreign that. And even though I do know that I sound very French and that it's difficult for me to hide my origin, because I came here for college and spent all those years that I described earlier with my kids, I came to appreciate what America had to offer. And I felt that there was something truly unique to the American system. It's a bit like asking oneself, why is it that America wins more gold medals at the Olympics than any other nation on this planet? Well, America must be doing something right. And I think that whatever America was doing right was not necessarily bad for soccer. And in fact, if you look at where we are today with women's soccer, which is a very interesting subject, there's more competition than ever, on the women's side, compared to 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, the same foreign consultant were telling us that, we should start thinking of not sending the players to college, that we should copy what was being done in Europe, because eventually Europe would become so competitive that we would no longer dominate the game. Well, look at where we are. We've been winning more games, more tournaments, more trophies in the past 4 years than ever before, despite that competition. And we've kept the system somewhat the same, i.e., most of the girls and women players still play in competitive clubs that go play state cup and play regional and play state. There is an academy program, but it resembles very much what we had in the past. And most of those players end going to college for 1 or 2 years, 3 years, which in itself is a plus. And if you extrapolate that system to the male side, you realize that maybe trying to force upon us American, the European system of telling kids, you have to decide when you're 14 or 15 whether you want to be pro or not. You have to give up your college eligibility very early on, and you should prefer the environment of a professional club like MLS than the environment of a D1 program. And to this day, that challenge all those people who say that they're wrong. The reality of what Dan experienced in college, he probably had a better coach, a better environment, a healthier place for an athlete to grow at those crucial ages of 18 and 19 than most of the kids who decide to go play in the MLS academies, which we all know this, and it's not to be overly critical, but we all know that they're far from being optimal. That they start from a good intent, which is to help maybe develop better players, but they're totally ill-equipped to handle the 17, 18, 19-year-old promising up-and-coming player. So they've taken the European model, which is far from perfect as it is. I can spend hours describing the social cost of those programs. But why try to replicate in Europe, something that is not American? Why abandon that cultural, educational program that we've had, which I think if you take a little time to look at the past and ask yourself, who were the notorious players that we may have had in the 90s or early 2000, you find a majority of them who went the American route. They went to college for a couple of years, and then eventually, but later on, in their career, they went into the pros. The real challenge for all those is that they turn pro, they matured as pro later than their European counterparts. Where in Europe, you're going to be looking at players and you're going to say, well, he's 19, he's 20, he's not making the national team or the youth national team. He doesn't have much of a chance, and let's disregard him. And I can give you plenty of examples of players who were abandoned at 19, 20, who went on to play in unknown leagues. I don't be condescending by naming countries, but in lesser leagues, and then reappearing at age 25 or 26, meaning maturing later. Well, I think most American players who have gone to college and who tried to make it pro, had to fight those prejudices that because they were 22, it was too late and they would never make it, when in fact 2-3 years later, at age 24, 25, their maturity had finally reached a stage where they were competitive. And believe it or not, they may at times even have been smarter players than the counterparts who didn't go through the educational process. So the reality of where we are in terms of the changes that we need to implement is maybe to revisit many of the things that we've done, and we've done a number of things wrong in this country, and maybe address them and try to take a few steps back. To take the example of Dan as someone who went to college is maybe the road less traveled, but the one that most should travel.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and for I'm curious on one level as to how willing are as you mentioned, young talent that is forced into the professional system at a little bit earlier of an age, formally speaking. I always felt like at Division I, and I know each year it's increased a little bit more and more, it's interesting that there are more players that are showing up from abroad and from European markets and European bigger clubs, as long as they weren't, they didn't play at a capacity that would rule them NCAA ineligible. They're still able to come over. And while those players are starting to become more prevalent in Division I soccer, it's also paired with the fact that the draft as a whole into MLS is becoming less and less significant and less of a value pipeline for real talent that will impact the team in MLS. And it's something that traditionally, I'm somebody that came from college and I experienced that route, and I'll always feel special about it. And it's my route. I wish everyone could experience that. But at the same time, it's interesting in that the growth of MLS is taking away from that progression and that specific path. And as you mentioned, I thought it was interesting that, there has been this excitement in MLS to increase their exposure and involvement with high-level talent and coaches and management and players, certainly from foreign markets and foreign leagues. But it doesn't always translate super quickly. And it's something that is not often thought about, or it doesn't seem like they take the time to think, well, hey, this is a really talented player. This is a really talented manager or a general manager, but are they aware of the functionalities of MLS? Do we think that what makes them good in that environment is going to continue to give us a competitive advantage. And I think that a lot of clubs are incredibly naive in that respect. And I've experienced it. I've seen other worse examples. Not to name names, but I was on the Montreal Impact for 3 years, and by no means do they set the gold standard on how a club should function. But there's a heavy emphasis and a heavy reliance and a heavy trust on bringing in foreign managers, foreign talent, that sort of leaves the club in this continual state of limbo where these coaches aren't given contracts longer than 2 years. The general managers are often not given time to have their plans fleshed out and have their ideas grow into fruition. And certainly the players are on a very strict and demanding reward system where their next paycheck and their next year's contract is very dependent on their performance, and very little or very often are they given the time to fully adjust to MLS. And I see that the teams that are consistently the most competitive across MLS are the teams that value continuity, and they go out and they do a very good job of picking the right people for the right position and for the right task at the club. And that can be in a lot of different levels. That could be a medical staff member. That could be a sports science person. That could be a fitness coach. That can be a player or a goalkeeper, whatever it may be. But I think MLS is caught up in a very heavy growth mentality right now, which is great, and it's going to help the league a lot. But it sort of highlights the fact that our biggest goal right now is to make money, and that certainly isn't going to translate into well-functioning clubs in the short term. Eventually, I hope that we can find a way where more teams start to understand that they should stick to a certain identity. They should try to do things the right way and not try to flip that paradigm every time there's a turnover in coaching staff, or they want to phase out the players that are older on, too much money on their contracts. It's an interesting thing, and they have to find a way to do it within the rules of MLS. I'm sure you know better than anybody, but it's just an interesting thing they have to try to balance, and something that I hope comes relatively soon, because it would make the league a whole lot more fun to play in.
I smile because you speak my language. You say many things I was saying in 2014, and I was optimistic still at the time that by 2020 things would have evolved in the right direction. I grew frustrated, as a fan, seeing all those foreigners come in. And you're right. Most of the new owners, most of the people who don't know any better, they're happy to own teams, but they think, well, maybe we should talk to somebody in England or somebody in Spain and somebody in Argentina or Brazil, and they end hiring foreign consultant and bringing their own friends. And those people may be quite competent, but they're incompetent when it comes to understanding how America works and how Americans think. So most of them, and a lot of historians who can do the statistic pretty rapidly, vast majority of those foreign people who come don't last 2 years. And it's a continuous restart, with another one and another one. And then we look at some of the team today and we feel that, they are where they were 20 years ago. And add to that, a very important point that you made about college is that they found it easier to import players from Central America, South America, Africa, Eastern Europe, Western Europe when they can, rather than focusing on developing the players, the American players. And unfortunately, there hasn't been much growth, and people will point fingers left and right as to why we didn't qualify for 2018 World Cup and why the national team isn't doing better, and people will say, oh, Jurgen this, and then we'll say, who's that? The reality of it had nothing to do with the fact that we've not been developing players, and we are guilty of, at the professional level, favoring the younger, cheaper, maybe in the eyes of those foreign consultants, more promising players than the one that we have. And then suddenly, everybody's surprised to see a Christian Pulisic become who he is in Chelsea or in England, when in fact there are probably many more of them if we only knew how to take care of them. Because you look at the population, you look at the number of players that we have, we should do much better than that. And I will make a comparison, sort of a micro-analysis, leaving MLS aside. I just look at who wants to play? So who are the kids who take their soccer seriously? Milton played for Amherst. So some people will say, "Well, it's just D3." What does it mean, just D3? I'm sure Milton, during his 4 years at Amherst, thought of going professional, and thought of his soccer as seriously as any kid at Indiana or any other D1 program. I mentioned Indiana because it's not far from here, and I've helped a number of kids from Indiana. Uh, but if I'm sitting in the throne of the president of US Soccer and I'm asking myself, what can I do for my nation? And I realize that there are over 1,000 programs, soccer programs in college, D1 through D3. I think the number is 1,100. That each one of those teams probably has 30 players, and each one of those 30 are serious about it. It's just like they're doing soccer, like they may be doing drawings or poetry. They on the soccer team because they think that they may have a shot at turning pro. It means there's a population of 30,000 boys. There's a population of equally 30,000 women wanting the same thing. And we are today in an environment where we tell the 30,000 boys, well, if you haven't made it to an MLS program or if you haven't gone to Europe, you really don't stand a chance, or you hardly stand a chance. Then there'll be a draft, and we'll pick 25 of you. How you get chosen, we don't know. We don't even understand it ourselves. But we sort of responsible for our own failure if we don't want to recognize that we have this population of 30,000, 30,000 young men aged 18 to 22. Ask yourself, how many are there in England or in France or in Spain, playing for the academies of the pro teams, who are still playing with the hope that they'll make it. I can talk about Monaco. We had between the age of 15 and 21, roughly 60 kids. And truth be told, we never knew which one was going to make it. But what it meant is that there were probably 20 programs in France, with 60 kids. You can do the numbers because pretty quickly, 20 times 60, it's 1,000 kids, 1,200, which eventually the federation would draw from to build a national team. We have 30,000 in America. Why is it that the federation, refuses? That some will tell you they tried, but I don't think that it was genuine. There's never been a real attempt to bring the federation and the NCAA together, and try to get the soccer programs in college to fit into the pro program as more sports do. So there's hope because I believe that things could improve for the best 6 years ago, and Dan is saying the things I was saying at the time. I still believe that there's time to address those issues, but what it really will require, whether it's MLS or federation, is to get people in charge who like America, understand US soccer, and want to build on the structure that exists today.
That's awesome. I'd like to pivot now to so you guys both talked about development and the importance of it, and there was this case study. I think um, I studied literature at Amherst, so I loved this book. It was called Outcast United, and it was about refugees and how this one coach really made a difference for this team and basically committed to them beyond just the soccer field into their lives. And I think in Dan's case and I, we really had a coach who really committed to the basically the same group of kids he took from the start all the way up to college. And I basically wanted to see if there might be, from Dan's perspective, sort of a case study there with Veles that perhaps speaks to what we've been discussing about here in terms of, I guess, a lot of what we talked about here really brought to mind that idea of why we first fell in love with soccer, why we played with different motives, what it meant um, to be a part of that team, and perhaps it was different than I guess perhaps what you might feel now in terms of like an employee now as opposed to a lovely. I don't know if you can with abstract something from what I just said.
No, of course. I think you put it perfectly, and it's, as I talk about my story so often with people, and it's although the conversation is usually geared through something else, it's always so. I always kind of take a moment and stop and think, wow, how lucky was I? Because the youth soccer experience that we had and that I was able to have and to lead me to the path that I ended up taking is gone. It doesn't exist. It was very rare even when we were experiencing it. There are so many teams that are, in America, especially at the time the sport is still growing, we have kids that have real talent that are getting cut from teams because they're not big or strong enough yet. And that just is sort of a learning curve in the country as to what players can be successful in the sport. And, to speak a little bit about our coach, Miguel, who is as unconventional as they come, as far as youth soccer coaches come, which has its pros and its cons. But the biggest pro that we had was that, I mentioned it before, but it's continuity. And this guy was, I think the biggest takeaway I had and why I am where I am now is because he never tried to change me. Certainly he tried to impart wisdom to me. He tried to coach me. He coached me vigorously at times. But he never tried to change my style and to make me into a cookie cutter version of a player in America. And I think my personal opinion on how the sport has progressed, especially at the national level, is that I would say that we're maybe guilty of producing the same type of player over and over again at a high level, although, but I don't think that we are seeing as many singular talents like Christian Pulisic and even Weston McKennie or Tyler Adams, these guys that are able to do what they're very good at and not imposed upon by any structure, any development academy or any team or any coach. And I think a huge part of players getting lost in the fray along their way to becoming a pro is the amount of coaches that they're exposed to and how everyone has a different philosophy. Everyone has a different team dynamic that they're searching for. Some teams may be possession-based. Some teams may just want to counter. Some teams may want to emphasize heavily on defending. And, along the way, you end up wearing a lot of different hats and trying to please a lot of different people to get results. And while that's understandable and very few people are given the opportunity to progress with a group of players and one coach for 10 years, 10, 11 years like I was and like we were, I think it just there's so much value in that. And for us, it's so interesting to hear people that have been thrown aside by this very system that we're trying to create to produce the best talent and the most consistent talent. And to the state of the development academies, especially in MLS specifically, I think the reality is the league is 25 years old. This is the 25th year for the league. I think compared to other major leagues that operate at a higher capacity and magnitude, we're really young, and we have to understand that. I think the best part, although this whole virus situation has certainly thrown a fork in this development, but it's been really nice to see the progression in financial spending on these development academies finally take some form of ownership, from ownership most likely, at these clubs that really do see the value in proper development, and they are trying to do things the right way. For a long time, and I'm sure your experience was, that wasn't happening. People may have said it, people may have ultimately wanted to do it, but at the end of the day, there's just a finite amount of money that owners and clubs are willing to spend. And if it's not on players or if it's not on anything that can immediately make them money in the here and now, they're very reluctant in investing in it. So again, it's so difficult because so many teams are now trying to mitigate the financial impact of this situation and what we're trying to accomplish now. At the same time, it's great to see that a lot of clubs are starting to take it very seriously, and I quantify seriously as spending money and doing it. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop and if we can bounce back before 2020 is over and not lose too many kids to not having teams anymore.
Jerome, what's your perspective on what we've
We
spoken? And
often
also,
say
I'd like
that,
to know.
you
I
know,
would
that
also like to know. So I also gave sort of an idealistic, and we talked about this little case study as well. From a business perspective as well, do you see it viable that our systems and structures might be able to support something like what Danny was talking about, so we don't produce cookie cutter players, etc.?
what Danny said is very true, and we've seen growth in the number of academies, and we do know that some owners are willing to spend on academies. Number of issues that are brought to the light, which is, well, let me start with what I'm going to say, which is that there's no doubt wherever you look that the academy is the soul of a club, and that it's wrong to believe that you can develop a professional club and have a following over the long term, without having an academy and youth teams. It gets complicated in America because of the college situation, and we have to find a compromise whereby we could have the players play for the MLS program and still go to college, because as it stands right now, MLS cannot cater to 19 and 20-year-olds. The pressure on the coaches and their coaching staff to perform is such that they're not willing to give playing time to young players just for the sake of allowing them to develop as players. It is too easy to go take players in Eastern Europe, Central America, Africa, as I said earlier. There's an ample supply, and they believe, maybe I will accuse most foreign players to be condescending in regards to American players, that they will prefer the foreign one over the American one. Issue that you face in regards to the business of those academies is that owners got tired of writing big checks. And there was a time when the top team had the most expensive players. They were called the DPs. Now they're now a different version, different aspect of that. But many of those owners, and the majority of them, again, knew very little about soccer. They thought, maybe it was the case in other sport, that one could, hire this very well-known, and I won't name anyone, European player, and spend millions, if not dozens of millions, on him, and have a winning, team. It worked in a few cases. It didn't work in most cases. And eventually, I think some of those owners realized that rather than spending 10 or 20 million on one player, that maybe they would be better off spending a couple of million a year on an academy. And that eventually, with the protection that the league provides in regard to the homegrown talents, that maybe they would have players, evolve and mature into top players. There's still a lot to be learned. And I was referring to the experience in Monaco, and my experience in Monaco is not unlike the experience of most people who've managed clubs such as Monaco, which is that it's very difficult to know, who's going to make it. And the one thing is that you don't know much, but that you need to be open to competition, that you need to be in an environment where continuously you're going to recruit better players, and you're going to let the weaker one goes. And you're going to be open to the fact that competition works. The way we've structured MLS, obviously, no promotion, no relegation, in itself is a mistake, because it already takes the competition away from the top teams. But then when it comes down to the academy, we've created a system where we've, in essence, built entitlement, where the kids who are 16 and 17 make it to their local MLS academy, and suddenly they've made it, which is very, very different from what I witnessed 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and what I think Dan was referring to earlier. In Illinois, where now we have the Chicago Fire Academy, we had half a dozen teams, and some were well known, like the Sockers or the Magic and many others. Every single year, you had 6 teams or so competing for State Cup, and they were fairly representative of the region of Chicago. I said 6, sometimes it was 10. And the Sockers and the Magic didn't win every year, and they certainly didn't win every age group. But you had all those coaches and all those small clubs, where people thought that they could develop competitive teams. And in the end, by the time those kids were 17 or 18, maybe the Sockers and the Magic had recruited them, and with those players, they could compete at the national level. But you had this very vibrant scene of competition among clubs. It's all gone. It's all gone. Why? Because today, you either make it to the academy, the Fires Academy, and you're 15 or 16, or you don't. And if you don't, what we have unfortunately witnessed, is a fall in the number of registration of young men wanting to play soccer because they feel that they're being pushed aside too early, and they go into other clubs where sometimes they try to compete, but they've already given up on this notion that they could really succeed. And I think MLS and the leadership of MLS should really revisit that reality that one, they need to cater to all age groups, i.e., 15 through 21. And two, they need to recreate this local competition. It's not enough for Chicago to compete with Kansas City or Minneapolis. It's 8 hours away. We need to have local competition, as we had it, as we still have with the girls, until a certain age. And unfortunately, I don't know that I'm very popular saying that because I was saying it 7 years ago and it hasn't changed.
Well, oftentimes when you're criticizing when things may not seem to be like
But see, there are
if you
plenty of new owners, like Nashville has new owners, Chicago is a new owner. There are plenty of people who, I think, believe that soccer will become something.
yeah
Now, I have not met them all. I know the older ones, and I would tell the ones who just bought teams or just started that they basically bought their team with the same marketing and with the same rhetoric from the league than those who bought 20 years ago. That soccer will make it as the big sport and this and that, as American football, baseball, basketball. But in 25 years, it hasn't made it. And while we are happy to have MLS and have the competition and to see all those young players get the opportunity to play, one, I would like more Americans to play and fewer foreigners. But two, I look at the economics and to use that expression, it ain't working. No one's watching MLS on TV. So the
yeah
budget for the team have shrunk in a way. We say we spend more on players, but there's no more revenues today than 10 years ago. And that's, for me, quite alarming.
I can tell you there's a lot of people watching Danny Lovitz at least. So we're very supportive. And there's 30,000. That's an amazing market that you've identified, and hopefully we can people watching this who might be able to have some sort of influence in it can shift. I want to talking about shifting and rhetoric a little bit. I'm gonna veer into at Move Emotion. We talk about the importance of sort of emotion and soft skills, and we try to give people who perhaps don't have access to people like yourselves often some sort of notes from your experiences. So basically, I wanted to see what metaphors from sports have you been able to take to life that have been helpful, and what sort of insights might you be able to give people who are going through a hard time in the pandemic. Basically, lessons from how to handle pressure and how to handle things that you've learned from both playing sports and managing and directing sports. Danny and Mr.
Take this
DeBontin.
one quickly because we're being relinquished back inside and I may lose you quickly. But at the same time, I think just to the point of
Yeah.
what the pandemic is able to sort of highlight as an opportunity for a lot of us is that at the same time, although it may be difficult, this is a unique opportunity. If you're able to, of course, work on your soccer, work on your game, work on whatever craft it is that you're trying to perfect and whatever your passion may be. But if you're not able to do that and the circumstances don't allow you to practice that in a good formal capacity, at the same time, you have to find a way to continue to better yourself as a person. For me, I'm in school now. I'm in the process of finishing an MBA and getting a master's in industrial and organizational psychology. I don't know if I would be able to manage this pandemic if I didn't have something like that to wrap my head around, to focus on. But for a while, I was trying to learn guitar. I know, Milton, you can play very well. You're musically gifted. I am not. But I think little things like this, little things that we could use the downtime, even though it can be maddening at times, but use the downtime, use this new sort of ability and availability that you have to yourself in a way to find little pockets and little areas of interest that you usually don't have time to focus on. And if it's a skill, that's great. If it's just an area of interest that you want to be more educated on, that's even better. read books. I've never had time to really read books to the capacity that I really wanted to, but that's been the silver lining of this whole situation. So for me, it's, I guess, a metaphor or a saying, even though it's very corny, is if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. But I think it's very relevant, and I think everyone can sort of identify with it at one point or another. But I'm about to lose you guys. I'm going to walk inside, but I'm sorry things were so crazy. I'm sorry this situation wasn't great. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope that we can do it again soon. But I wish you guys all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy. It was great seeing you, Milton. It was great meeting you. And I hope your families are all well, and I look forward to keeping up with you soon. Take care, guys. See ya.
Keep it up, Dan. Take care, brother. Dan, most people don't know, started his MLS career after, like, with a knee surgery. And I think most people, I think when they look at success stories, don't realize what goes on behind the scenes. So he's competing here for a job, and his meniscus isn't there, and it's just impressive. His idea of what life gives you lemon, make lemonade. It might sound corny, but he's lived it, and his career demonstrates it. So for people out there who are having tough times and who might have a dream but who are being held back by something that might be out of your control, there's always something that you can learn from people like Dan. But Jerome, perhaps take us home, finish, or what insights might you have for people who are going through uncertainty at this time, in metaphors from soccer, perhaps?
Well, let me comment first on what Dan just said. I was very impressed, and I think he's a good ambassador of what American players are like. Um, it's a real contrast, spending lots of time in the world of soccer, to notice how American players are, in a way, more articulate, better at expressing themselves, seem to have maybe more of an intellectual background than others. I agree with everything he said. Those are trying times, for everybody, and certainly at levels much more important than soccer.
Yeah.
But to keep it to our environment and soccer, we've never experienced what we just did, of saying all the leagues, Central America, South America, obviously US and Europe, shutting down at about the same time. And for all of us who like the sport, finding ourselves on Saturday morning or Sunday morning or throughout the week, not having soccer to watch. And it's not like we could maybe not watch the EPL and watch an African league, or things that we would not watch normally. There just wasn't any soccer to be watched. And then soccer is going to change. The impact of COVID-19 is going to have significant consequences in the way the clubs are run, because the financial cost has been gigantic for everybody. Most clubs survive thanks to TV revenues, and TV revenues went out the door, and no more transfer of players. So no ability to trade players, no ability to have TV revenues, no ability to sell tickets for games. So many of the clubs that you and your audience follow, are today hoping that things will resume some normalcy pretty rapidly, but they all know that it's going to be a different set of circumstances. More personal, and it's not just because of the pandemic. I can't be happy if I don't play soccer. So 4 months went by where I had no ability to go, on the field, and I would jokingly say that it made it very difficult for me to be balanced, because in the business world, you cannot push somebody with your shoulder. If you don't like somebody, you have to be respectful of him. You can't, inadvertently step on his toes and then apologize. And so not having soccer sort of kept this very basic aspect of my personality at bay. And I think there's a lot to be said for competition. Whatever level you play at, to be on a soccer pitch with guys who want to score more goals than you, and at times they'll push you around, and on corner kicks, they'll step on your toes or do whatever. And not having that, I found to be very difficult to assume. So tomorrow is a big day because we're resuming play tomorrow afternoon.
That's huge. I remember you in the alumni games coming after me. I guess there was definitely some rivalry there that you needed to get out of the way. And what you said about sort of that spirit of the game. There's somebody watching us, Coach Shea, who always
Right.
brought that fire, and and he's outside of the soccer pitch, just the sweetest guy, and he works with education, etc. But in that national championship run, he was definitely encouraging us to have soccer be an outlet for that type of, I guess, drug.
But I'm hoping, Milton, that out of those 4 months, will come out, more technical players, of all ages.
Yeah,
Many of the friends I play with, in their, 40s, 50s, 60s, and didn't necessarily play, during their youth. And when asked what they could do to play better, I told them, well, you got to develop your skills. And what you can do if there are no games is just start juggling the ball and maybe learn to juggle the ball with your thigh first and then let the ball come down to your good foot and then use your bad feet. And I have a number of friends, male and female, in their 50s, who 3 months ago could hardly juggle the ball 3 or 4 times, who now are doing 50.
right.
And hopefully it's true to most out there who have not played that they still find the time to pick up the ball, go in the park or in the backyard and juggle the ball and develop their skills.
And basically developing those types of skills, again, going back to the title, it's more than just soccer. It's this is about your life and making the most of this moments that we have, this present that we have. And I just want to transition quickly to close. We will have more of these dialogues. Next we have a group of artists on Monday, talent from the acting world, and they'll be reminding us that the world is a stage, but that perhaps with all these metaphors, there's definitely more that we can, I guess, implement or take from these different spaces. And today we talked about soccer, but we saw two human beings with their huge hearts caring about everybody. And I just want to thank you again, Mr. Devontan, for joining us. And again, a shout out to all the people who are behind the scenes, our team, and then the parents and everybody whose shoulders we're on. Is there any final comment that you'd like to, or
No,
question?
just to tell you, it was great to reconnect with you after all those years, and I wish your partners and you all the success in the world with your endeavors.
Thank you so much. All the best. So those are the artists, Emilia Cabellos y Rodrigo Jerez. So for the people en mi red estéreo, estos diálogos que van a tener es con actores y una actriz de bueno, muy reconocidos acá en Colombia. Entonces, únanse y bueno, espero que aprendan muchísimo de estos conversatorios. So, thank you guys. So let's close this.